We're finally here.
We made
Wait,
it.
we made
We
it. Okay,
made
so
it.
so it's storming where you are pretty heavily.
Long story short, because of the wonderful powers in Rome, I go to mass like 50 minutes from where I live. And
Oh
so
no.
I get to celebrate after that point, driving in,
Oh yeah, you can hear
massive
it. I can hear it.
storms all the way back. So thankfully, since it's Rogation days, and we're celebrating like penance and asking God for good weather, for good crops, he's definitely
Hmm.
giving us some water. So I think it's just an answer to prayers, long story short.
Hopefully, yeah. It's been really weird because I don't know about Texas, but up here in Minnesota, the weather has been insane. We've had a ton of flooding, and then it
Mhm.
got really, really dry, and hot, and then all of a sudden it got cold and just yucky for a couple of weeks, and we're finally getting some rain, but it's been pretty hit or miss here too. So I don't know. The weather has just been crazy. Um,
Texas weather is notoriously insane. If any of you viewers live in Texas, you'll know what I'm talking about because especially in wintertime, we'll have, it'll be freezing in the morning. Y'all get bundled up to go outside. And then by the time it's the afternoon, it's like 70 degrees,
Hold
ready
on
to
a
go.
minute. When you
So,
say freezing, what do you mean? What is
yeah,
freezing for a Texan?
Texas freezing is like,
Like
yeah, 32
45.
degrees.
It's what?
It's like, yeah, 32.
Yeah, okay.
That's
That's
like,
like
that's
hot.
bad. That's getting really cold. Yeah. So for
Here
Texas,
in the spring, people are like shedding their jackets at 32
mm,
degrees. Yeah. We're crazy here.
it's just the difference between Yankees and sane people, I guess. So I don't know.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I'm glad that we're finally able to talk about this because Texas, speaking of Texas,
Hmm.
has had a lot of really weird stuff going on lately. I think a lot of us look to Texas as sort of this bastion of conservatism and Christianity a little bit, kind of at the bottom of the Bible Belt there.
Hmm.
But you guys have had a lot of really weird stuff going on there. Can you like tell us a
Hmm.
little bit more about that?
Yeah. So you're right. Texas is very conservative overall. Actually, there's a trend in politics over the last couple elections called like flip Texas blue,
Mhm.
and there is this thought, even kind of mainly by non-Texans, that Texas will turn blue because of the massive amount of illegal immigration that's coming into the state. Except what's
Mhm.
interesting is that when you actually look at the vote totals overall, it's actually Texas is technically getting redder because like we Texans complain that Californians move here and bring their politics with them. And there can be a certain amount of truth to that. But really, there's a lot of people leaving blue states coming to Texas. And so, like, as an example, that's why Florida, as we all know, got so red. It was all those New Yorkers that were moving down to Florida. Same thing
Mhm.
here. So, Texas is very red, very conservative, especially when you get out of Central Texas. Central Texas is like the only area where it's like true liberalism and progressivism. It's around Austin.
Mm.
And so it leads perfect into what we're talking about, though, because since Texas is so red, you do have it is kind of seen as like a bastion to where if like you can break down the bastion, then anything else can be stormed.
Mhm.
And so what Texas has been experiencing for a couple of years now, but especially this year, is we've been having all of these far left groups coming down and orchestrating various progressive rallies or events. And they really specifically are targeting our schools and our children. So we've been having a lot of drag shows that have been trying to pop up mainly by progressive, quote unquote, Protestant sects. So groups like the
Mm.
United Church of Christ, um, which is Barack Obama's denomination. So that gives you an idea. Um, yeah, I'm glad you're here, Sally Sue. It's the best place on earth, in my opinion. Um, and
We're
so,
looking to
I mean, yeah,
move. Maybe we should consider Texas.
look, move
Oh.
down here. You guys won't regret it. So, and you'll
Honestly,
miss the snow, but that's about it.
it's and not to totally divert from what you're talking about, but Minnesota has been really horrible this legislative session. I think I've talked about it a little bit on this show, but it just keeps getting worse. We just stripped language out of our I believe perhaps even our some of our previous legislation or constitution that clarified that people who are pedophiles are not a protected class or sexual orientation. We just stripped that language. We are we just there was a part of an omnibus bill. There was an amendment to strip sales tax from, you know, car seats and strollers and essential items, and then they struck that out of the bill. So now those things will not be tax free, even though that was, you know, the only positive piece of legislation I've seen this entire session. Uh, you know, protected abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy without parental consent. Same with trans surgery. We just
Mhm.
made it so that parents can lose custody of their children if they do not consent to their child receiving mutilation or hormone therapy, things like that. I mean, it has been brutal. This whole legislative session, talk about a spiritual attack. I don't know what to do anymore. It feels uninhabitable here. It is very anti-Christian, especially anti-Catholic. They're even starting a biased, what is it, like a directory of sorts for what are
Mhm.
considered conservative extremists here. They want to start putting people like me on a list for speaking
Mhm.
out and saying the things we're not supposed to say. They're publicly putting together a legislation to crack down on people like me and restrict free speech. So it's just been nonstop. And then to see the stuff going on in Texas, like Minnesota, it's more surprising, or it's less surprising, but Texas, it's more surprising to me because you guys are so Christian down there. We're like California. We're like the Midwest California. And
I get you.
you know, so in Texas with all the drag shows and stuff like that, and that how prevalent has that been down there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I started getting into protesting these things fairly recently. And the main reason that I got involved with this was one, I think it's just a Catholic duty to go out and to protest that which is evil.
Mhm.
That's the real principled reason. So wherever you live, that reason applies. But two, also because I was seeing how these organizations, these different communist organizations, what they're trying to do is they're trying to penetrate small towns in specific to really, I guess, maybe gaslight the mentality of conservatives there, being like, look, stuff is going on down here. It's completely fine. Why are you up on your high horse? Why would you
Mm.
care? And so we've been protesting these various organizations that have been coming down and orchestrating this. Thankfully, in our area, in comparison to others like the big cities, we're somewhat more relaxed in the sense that we don't have a ton. But even whenever I say we don't have a ton, what I mean by that is it's like by the time the summer is over, we'll have done at least 10 protests, in just
Wow.
our small kind of like small town world.
Yeah.
Whereas, for instance, places like Dallas, our contacts up there have been talking about how they're just essentially overloaded. There's so
Mhm.
many groups coming from outside of states to orchestrate different events like this. And I think what's different, I guess, about our states is that our legislature, right, is very conservative. And so
Yeah.
not as conservative as I would like it. We're not like Mississippi or Alabama or anything like that, but they've already uh, passed, I think it's called Texas Senate Bill 14, which completely bans child mutilation, hormones, and pretty much anything that has to do with any
The
type of
exact opposite of what we're doing here.
yeah. So we just have to have it signed by our governor. It's going back to the Senate for some last tweaking, our Texas Senate. But the governor's, I'd say Governor Abbott's a fair governor overall. I would say, definitely a kind of he's definitely a conservative governor. I wouldn't say he's like a perfect governor by any stretch of the means, but he's a good governor, I'd say overall.
Mhm.
He is a Catholic, and so he's vowed to sign this. He already vowed, and he did before Roe v. Wade was toppled. He signed one of those trigger bans,
I
and so
remember that. Mhm.
so for Texas, it's completely banned in our state abortions. I think I'm going off the top of my head, so someone have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like I think it's like, yeah, you receive 10 years in jail. It's a class A felony plus like $200,000 fine, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. So it's like, understandably and justly harsh laws that have been put on the subject.
Yeah, and I think that's important to just because people will always say like they want to throw women in jail for getting abortions, but that's actually not what the legislation has done. Is
Mhm.
it what they've done is disincentivized committing abortions so that the provider or anyone who aids and abets in an abortion, they are the ones who are prosecuted, not the women seeking abortions.
Mhm.
And that's really important to clarify because there's always so much debate about that. But yeah, I mean, I just feel like this this legislative session, this year already, I don't know. Is it just coming out of 2020? It's just everything really ramped up. I feel like it just has been this exponential trajectory where things have snowballed so rapidly. It's like inertia. Is it too much to stop? And what do we do? Because it is weighing heavily for me anyway on my conscience and on my spiritual life to see this going. It's hard not to despair. I think sometimes we live in sort of this. We have obviously you and I think we're hopeful people, but there are some people, especially if they're more melancholic, they are just naturally more prone to that despair. And I understand why. It seems like we are quite literally going to hell in a handbasket.
Mhm.
And so I think what we should talk about and what we're going to talk about tonight is why spiritual warfare is important and what we need to do, what the saints have said about spiritual warfare, and what does the church prescribe, and how should we, like, through what lens should we view spiritual warfare? And
Mhm.
I don't know if you want me to share some of the video that you sent me about that was put together. It's a pretty long video, so I don't know. Is there a certain point that you want me to go to, or how would you like me to stream that before we sort of dive into it?
I'm I'll put you on the spot. Pick your favorite portion.
I didn't
You
watch
see
it all. It was 18 minutes.
see, now we found the truth comes out. Now the
I
truth
know.
comes I have a feeling I'm the only
I should have watched it while I was waiting for you for a half an hour. That was
you
my
should have just
fault.
started the stream and played it. You probably would have had time.
I
No, no.
know. I didn't know
No,
how
that's
long you were gonna be. Oh.
yeah, no, that's fine. I'll think about it. I think we can probably show maybe near the end because it's definitely there's some cool scenes of it, for sure. I think what we could start off is like going to your point on the despair. I bet everybody in the audience probably has a certain amount of black pilledness that they've kind of gone into, whether it's
Mhm.
politically or in the context of the crisis in the church.
Yeah.
I am not actually. I'm very white pilled, believe it or not, just because I recognize that, at least in the world of politics, because that's really what we're speaking about here, is that the reason that the left is going so insane is because they know that we're winning and that normies are waking up and they realize like we need to get stuff done now. And they're overplaying their hand. They're overplaying their hand extremely because really, it's like I tell my friends, most Americans, right? They're not the far right conservative religious group. They're not the pink haired leftists over here. Most Americans are kind of just laissez-faire people who are like, as long as it doesn't really affect me, do what you want, right? Keep it private, whatever, you do you, etc. Very libertarian-esque
Yeah, I
on
was
a
gonna say
practical
very
level.
libertarian. Yep.
Mhm. But I have noticed that there are points where you start to see a lot of people wake up and push back. And really, it comes down to children. Like, what are you going to do with children? And so I think for a lot of parents, as we've heard many analysts say, I think a lot of people started waking up during the 2020 lockdowns as well.
Mhm.
And because one, you're kind of sitting at home scratching your head saying like, I'm not allowed to literally say any dissenting opinion online without being shut down. And I say that as someone who's not a conspiracy theorist. I'm actually someone who's just like very much so level-headed and open to debates. But the fact that we couldn't have any debate at all, it was
Mhm.
just shut up, accept this, that's it. I was like, I don't know, man. This seems a little sus. And
Yeah, well, the clips going around of the news and what they were saying about this is a
Mhm,
pandemic of the unvaccinated. If you are unvaccinated, you're a terrible person and you deserve to die and all this
mhm,
stuff. And it was like the ultimate gaslighting. I mean,
mhm,
it just continues. And now they're sort of pretending like, well, I remember seeing an article. Why didn't they tell us? like, we were telling you the whole time, but we were
No.
censored. We weren't allowed to share that. It's just wild, and I feel like spiritually though, I mean, I think about the hysteria, and there were hysterics on both sides, right? Like there were the
Oh, sure,
Karens
yeah.
that were screaming at people in the store for not wearing their mask. But on the other end of things, then you have uh the like conspiracy theorists that dove into every conspiracy theory, and it turned into lots of sort of apocalyptic doomsday stuff, which I
Mhm.
understand that, right? Like I can
Yeah, it was very different,
understand
yeah.
that this is
Uh-huh.
unprecedented and the times were crazy, but you could see the enemy. You knew it was of the devil because of the division that was sown, and the way that it solidified those divisions and created us versus them, sort of between these different factions. I mean, I think to me that
Mhm.
was the most obvious. Obviously, these are sacramentals. The masks are sacramentals. The vaccination is a kind of baptism that sort of tells you your status and you've been welcomed in.
Mhm.
It was just so interesting spiritually to see sort of these secular sacramentals, and we're still seeing them with the transgender push, trying to baptize these children into this ideology and get them as young as possible. It's so funny. They do believe in infant baptism.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
these people do believe in infant baptism, and you're just seeing it like with having all this like queer baby wear. Why are we sexualizing these kids? And
Mhm.
then you sort of go back to, this is in the spirit of Alfred Kinsey and Dr. John Money and of course Sigmund Freud, all these people, and we're just sort of seeing it continue to manifest in these new ways here, and it
Mhm.
is impacting us spiritually. So for you, you're white pilled, you would say,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I agree with you. I think that the enemy is overplaying his hand, and things are going to come to light, right, very very quickly here.
Mhm. Yeah, you have to be white pilled because it's like to me, I don't see the realistic Christian alternative to not be white pilled because it's like on the one end of it, if Christ is king, then he only permits the devil to go so far for a certain reason, right? It might be a chastisement. It's always going to be ultimately at the end of the day to bring about a greater good and to exalt his own glory at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I, speaking about the people fighting in the store, I at the time, right, worked at a grocery store as a manager of like 60 checkers. And oh
Wow.
my gosh. So it was so funny because the first couple of weeks, it was like we were soldiers on Iwo Jima because like people were like, thank you so much. Thank you for your service because, we were essential workers.
Yeah, yeah.
Ridiculous.
My
I was like,
husband was an essential worker, so he had the papers so he could go out and drive and do his work
yeah,
as
we
a
had that.
lineman. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, it was
Absolutely
ridiculous.
crazy.
I was like, "I am not doing anything like last week you were yelling at me for no reason. Now you're treating me like I'm, some wounded
Like a
warrior."
firefighter or
Yeah, but I think, like, what the lockdown did was it showed the parents what was going on at schools
100%. Yes.
because because you see all of this ideology, started to creep in the context of schools into people's homework, as well as teachers, trying to influence students unbeknownst to the knowledge of their parents. And what has thankfully risen up is you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents going to all of these different school board meetings. They'll be reading these immoral books that are like, hey, look, this is on the shelf. I remember before I worked at the grocery store a long time ago, I remember in like sixth and seventh grade, I used to volunteer at the local library. And mind you, I'm in rural conservative Texas, right? And
Mhm.
when I was, and I wasn't Catholic at the time, but I was definitely, your Bible thumping Texan. And I would, help put the books back on the shelves. And when we would go to the young adult section, right? It's not like, fantasy novels. It's not the classics or anything like that. I remember putting these books on that now in hindsight, I was too young and innocent, I think at the time to like fully click what was going on.
Hmm.
But these were books essentially like instruction manuals on how to engage in these immoral lifestyles. And
Oh,
this,
so
stuff that was
gross.
given in a public library to people who are, supposedly supposed to be like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, going. And what it showed us is like, okay, so they've been doing this a long time.
Mm-hmm.
What should our response be? One of
Right.
my one of my friends sent out an email that I'll get into a little bit later because it's going to pertain to the main point of this, which is the upcoming protest that we're going to be having in San Marcos, Texas tomorrow, which is one of my friends. He's a faith formation head. He and I work together teaching kids catechism. And he sent out an email to this massive parish, explaining how it's not just the trans movement, which is trying to corrupt these children, but also you see Satan clubs starting and,
Yes.
go to Baphomet statues on courthouse lawns and stuff like that. And then specifically where I live, like right down the road, about 20 minutes away, they're going to be having tomorrow night a satanic invocation. They're going to go to like some type of satanic high priest is showing up at the city council, and instead of like the time of prayer that they customarily, if you will, have before their meetings, they're going to have a satanic high priest give an invocation, and the city hall is literally 100 feet from the blessed tabernacle of the Catholic Church next door. It's
Hmm.
so close. They're like right next door to each other. And he, in this email, I think wonderfully worded this when he said at the very end, he says, to all of us, we all need to publicly repent for allowing this stuff to continue as far as it has gone. Because
Mm-hmm.
the problem is that so many conservatives and so many Catholics, let's be honest, we are good at complaining online. We are very good at complaining online,
Mm-hmm.
but complaining online only goes so far.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
most of the time, the complaining, I mean, at the absolute best, is just going to get an apology from somebody, right, on Twitter or something. But it's not really going to get truly anything done. What needs to be done is conservatives from all ages, right? I don't care if you're 9 or if you're 99, like need to do something, whether that be in the context of organizing groups at your parish and then looking up, okay, what is going on in my local town? What is going on in local towns around me? How can I organize and go out and pray, go out and protest, and also go out and witness the Catholic faith to the non-believer? How can I get involved in local politics? Because that's something we need to be way better as. Like, who are we electing as the city
Yeah.
council member, the school board members, the sheriff, things like that? Being cognizant. And so, one of the encouragements I want to give to everyone, and then I want to hear your thoughts, is don't complain anymore. Do something about this,
Mm-hmm.
because we actually have to go and do something. And so if you're a man out there, take the masculine initiative and be like, okay, I'm going to call 5 dudes at my parish, 10 dudes at my parish. We're going to start a group. I'm going to have each one of those 5 dudes call another 5 dudes. And we're going to get a group of 50 men or something. And then we're going to act like a unit. We're going to pray for each other. We're going to study together, and we're going to tackle these different things that come our way. Let's see. Do I remember the Westphalia church burning east of Temple or El Paso Sacred Heart statue smashing? Texas is in a satanic battle. I vaguely do remember that, actually. So in West Texas, there are especially so Texas. One of the things that's cool about Texas is we have pretty much every type of geography you can
Yeah,
imagine.
you do. Mm-hmm.
We have pine forests in East Texas. We have massive southern like prairies. We have where I was born. I was born in Lubbock, Texas. The Panhandle, so nothing but grass and dust out there. And then you have Central Texas with our hills where I live, and then West Texas where it's desert and stuff like that. But there's some really like cool traditional chapels that are out there in West Texas, and even non-traditional chapels have been starting to be targeted out there. And I can't confirm this, but I do know that a lot of so one, this I can confirm. Obviously, a lot of our illegal immigration comes through that area, and a lot of the people that are involved in smuggling the illegal
Mm-hmm.
immigrants are highly involved in like folk satanic religion
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in Mexico, and they bring it up
Yep.
here to where
Mm-hmm.
when you go
Like
to even
Santa
sometimes the
Muerta,
local
right? Santa
Santa Muerte,
Muerta
yeah,
is
stuff like
one.
that, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll,
Yeah. I'm
like, it's
familiar with
crazy.
that.
You'll
I have a sister in El
Oh,
Paso.
you are?
So yeah.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. They'll bring those things, and, it's becoming incredibly common because you'll go down, like one of the best places to eat in Texas is just, find your local Hispanic taqueria. That's amazing because
Yeah.
you're going to get like really good food made right there. But when you go looking around in like the actual store portion of the building, you'll find, your classic St. Jude and Sacred Heart statues and candles. But then literally right next to it, you'll find Santa Muerta or witchcraft stuff, like pray, like, light this candle if you want to have true love or want to make money or want to curse somebody or give like
Oh my goodness.
lie, like all of this stuff. That actually, one of the things I always want to try to commend Pope Francis on is that when he went to Mexico, he it was like the first day I think he came out pretty strongly against Santa Muerta, and it's
That's
good because
awesome.
a lot of the problem in Mexico is that they've kind of blended authentic Catholicism with Hispanic like folk religion, and so you see
Mhm.
all these folk saints that aren't actually saints at all. They're kind of like, oh sure, they may like wear a cross or a
It's a
rosary, but
weird syncretism, yeah.
yeah, it's not actually about worshiping the Holy Trinity. It's about, what can this being give to me in some type of form or fashion. I mean, Americans, we have that too. That's just called the prosperity gospel. But
Yeah.
um, you know,
That's so true. And so when we look at all of these things sort of coalescing together, I think you're right. We have to take a more active role than we do in the church. And it's something that I've noticed for a long time as an anti-abortion activist. It was so interesting in 2020 because I've been doing activism, going down to the Capitol, protesting, talking to legislators, working at pregnancy centers, doing stuff on the ground, sidewalk
mhm,
counseling, all that stuff. And it's so hard to find other moms they're doing it with their kids. And I get it. Like, I really get it. It's hard to do that stuff when you have a bunch of kids.
mhm,
However, 2020 comes around and you have all these moms who are fighting for health freedom, which is amazing and lovely. And I was right there with them down at my state capitol, protesting and rallying for just conscientious rights and religious freedom and all this stuff and making sure that I'm not co-parenting with the government.
mhm,
But I thought to myself, I looked at the sea of people and so many parents, kids, men and women of all ages, especially a lot of younger families, and I never see them fighting abortion. And I'm
mhm,
sitting here going, we have on average more than one child dying every hour here in the state of Minnesota every single day in an abortion facility. We have 27 kids on average, and it's probably more now since the Dobbs decision because we're sort of a safe haven for abortion. We're even welcoming in abortionists for late term abortion and protecting them, even if they have stuff going on with their license and weird legal stuff going on. We will still let them practice here in Minnesota right now. It's just wild. And so I'm
mhm,
sure that number is higher. And where are these people? I've said to some of them, even people I love, like, I think it's awesome that you were here, but now I know that you actually can do this. You've
mhm,
done it. And we need to band together more. This isn't a battle for just a bunch of old boomers who have been fighting abortion since 73. This is for us. It is our children who are being killed right now. It's their grandchildren, but it's our children. Where
mhm,
have you been? Where have you been? And that's, I think,
mhm.
with a Are you there?
There I am. Yeah,
Weird. That was weird.
I think
StreamYard
it.
is
I think
being
it just
weird.
briefly cut out. So, but it was
Mhm.
okay. I can still hear you. I can still hear
Good.
you, but then after a
Oh,
second, it was just
interesting.
like everything froze. But yes, no, I fully agree with you because it's like when you have all these people who, occasionally come out, or when we ask the question of where have you been, or where are you, like, are you going to come back and do something?
Mhm.
You know, someone could definitely write a whole book on just the series of events that take place like within our culture wars from like the 1960s up until the 2060s or something. But um, I think a lot of it's apathy. Like I think Americans, we have it's like I truly believe America is one of the greatest countries in the world. But I think because we have so many opportunities and it's so easy to just do what you want to do,
Mhm.
that we just think, if it's not directly hurting me, that does it really matter fundamentally at the end of the day. And the problem is that, my generation especially, like some 20% are somewhere under the rainbow banner, the highest ever of my generation. And my generation, it's like it's like some, like 18% or something that is actually even physically fit enough for military service. It's ridiculous, especially
Hmm.
if we get into a war with China or something like that. I'm like, well, I don't know if you want my generation showing
No.
up on the battlefield, because they can't even tell you what a woman is, and can't get off of the computer chair long enough.
Well, and
Um,
I think that's what you're touching on there with the computer stuff is really important because I think that is like a portal right now for
mm,
Satan in so many ways because it keeps us intellectually lazy. It keeps us in our faces are in our phones and we're arguing online or what have you, or we're just doom scrolling, right? It's so
mhm,
easy and it's so addictive. And that is like the devil's playground, right? Idle hands is the devil's playground. And so
mhm,
not only are you thinking that you're super busy because your mind is constantly consuming information, but in reality you're not doing anything productive, you're not building up the kingdom of God, you are not going out and waging war, making disciples of all nations. You are just doom scrolling. That's it. And it's like the devil uses these things to
mhm,
just keep us busy, right? Like that's all that it is just this useless busyness and and I think that's part of the problem too is we have to renounce that and be more proactive in rejecting that like that temptation and finding ways to master this thing so that it's not mastering us because we are
mhm.
enslaved to our phones.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I think one thing that people forget is, it's at least, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think that a lot of people, we just practically act like the devil doesn't exist. Like, we assent to his belief, but we don't actually, like, really at the end of the day believe it. What's up, buddy?
Yeah,
Uh,
good to see you, Jeremiah.
Good to see you again. Yeah, no, I think we just don't believe that the devil exists, practically speaking, in a lot of ways, because, if we truly believe that there is this fallen angel named Lucifer who is waging, like, nonstop war against the Most High and is hell bent on destroying us. I love the way that the Catechism of Pope Saint Pius X phrases one of these realities. It talks about how that the devil hates mankind because he envies us. The
Mhm.
reason he envies us is because, we're made in the image and likeness of God, just like the angels, but we redeemed, we actually have the opportunity of salvation, unlike the angels. And so the devil hates us. So what he's going to do is he's going to try to find any way he can to either lead us to hell in a blatant fashion, right? Because some people, I think you kind of get to a certain point, and I think Satanism is there, where you're like, that you're doing evil, but you just do not care.
Mhm.
But then for most people, it's through subtle means. It's giving, like Aquinas says, like essentially all sin is going to be rooted in a supposed good. Like, you
Mhm.
see a supposed good, but it's not according to reason. It's not according to God's law, and so you just start kind of randomly grabbing these things, and you go off the deep end. And so I think that what we should focus on is, our interior life and how to live a more authentically holy life. Because then what we'll be able to do is, like, so then the devil will definitely ramp up his attacks against you, but
Mhm.
that's when you ramp up your counterattacks. You know what I'm saying? Do you want to talk about
Absolutely.
practical, like, practical things?
Yeah, I think that would be really good to talk about. And two for one, I just want to add C.S. Lewis's screw tape letters. The screw tape letters are so phenomenally insightful for understanding the subtle
Mhm,
ways that the enemy sort of plants seeds and waters them and just waits for you to fall into your demise. Especially if you are spiritually weak and you haven't fortified yourself through prayer and sacred scripture. I think those are the two most important places to begin, especially with Lectio Divina. I recently interviewed Dan Burke on my podcast to talk about the importance of meditative prayer, and a lot of the saints say you will not go to heaven unless you are not regularly engaging in meditative prayer. And how
Mhm.
often are most of us even doing Lectio Divina or praying in that way? I don't think most Catholics do. I mean, they might pray the rosary, but they're not falling into it meditatively. A lot of us sort of check it off our list as, oh, I got
Mhm.
that done today. And I loved listening to Dan Burke talk about it because he sort of highlighted that if you are encountering God in a mystery and he is speaking to you in a particular way, and let's say you don't finish the rosary, but you truly encountered Christ in that moment and he spoke to you, that is going to give you more grace than making sure you just checked off your rosary for the day. Because that's the whole point of the rosary, is to meditate and connect with God, to talk to him and have a conversation. And I love St. Teresa of Avila's The Interior Castle, but also kind of paired with that is Devil in the Castle by Dan Burke. I started listening to it on audiobook after I interviewed him, and it was just a gut punch again. You just sort of are reminded of how wanting
Mhm.
you are spiritually, and just realizing, wow, I'm really not where I should be spiritually. This is my I'm very wounded, and my prayer life is really, really weak, and my will is so, so dang weak. And so what are some of the things that you do, Mr. Third Order Dominican, when
Mhm.
you are sort of ramping up your prayer life, especially as spiritual attacks seem to be growing right now?
Mhm. That's a good question. So, a book that I think everyone should read, that's going to really help people, like a step-by-step manual, if you will, is actually a manual, which is called um, The Three Ages of the Interior Life by Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange. Phenomenal work, because when you start to realize what the Catholic is called for in his or her prayer life, you realize how much grace and how far we are. For instance, when we think of contemplation, when we hear that word contemplation, we generally think of, meditating on a different truth of scripture, one of the mysteries of the rosary, etc. And while there's a truth in that, strictly speaking, true Catholic contemplation is in the context of prayer where you are lovingly gazing upon Christ and you forget you exist. You forget time and you're kind of swallowed up. And this is something that takes place later in the spiritual life. Like most Catholics, I'll explain what I do, but I'll explain kind of the trajectory of where we want to go. So let me lay out the trajectory of where we want to go. So for Catholics, we have three stages or three, ages, if you will, of the interior life. The first one that we all, for the most part, start off in is called the purgative way, right? The purgative way, that term purgative gives to the intellect illusions of purging oneself from sins or from vices and corruptions. And that is correct. We're all born, right, in original sin, but by sanctifying grace infused into us at holy baptism, we're able to take the natural virtues, the natural moral virtues that are in us, and now they have a supernatural effect. So we're able to harness these virtues for the progression in holiness and ultimate beatification with God in heaven. We also now have the theological virtues, which are going to be able to lead us not just to heaven, but also have the divine life within us. But we start off very slow. We start off our spiritual life very slow. And how we need to grow in holiness, the practical steps, which I'll get into now, is going to be first and foremost through three things. It's going to be, well, I guess you could say more than three things, but I'll say three because I think you can boil them all down into one. Sacraments, right? Sacraments and prayer, study of your faith, right? And then the practice of virtue. So this is what your basic Catholic needs to be doing as often as he or she can. So every day you should be praying something. Prayer is absolutely necessary for salvation. And there's a specific kind of prayer, which I'll get into in a second. But just prayer in general is absolutely needed for salvation. And so, for instance, most people who are watching MOC, or at least my show, right, go to the TLM. If you have a
Mhm.
Latin Mass Missal, you now have a book that has lots of prayers in it for morning and evening offerings, right? And so that's a wonderful place to start praying those prayers every morning and every evening, right? Especially also if you're a family and if you're a dad, or even if you're a single mom, praying those over your children and praying those with your children. Also, again, as a Dominican, I would argue outside of the Holy Mass, the best devotional that you can use is going to be the 15 decades of the Rosary, right? Praying the mysteries of the Rosary, because at the end of the day, Our Lady is the perfect disciple of our Lord. And therefore, if we are going to model our life after anyone, it's a no-brainer. Pick the perfect disciple, I'm not trying
Hmm.
to belittle the other disciples, but I think that the other disciples would agree with me in saying, follow Mary, right? It's something that we say a lot, but don't do a lot, right? And so I recommend everyone
Isn't that so
actually.
much of the modern Christian life, though? My goodness, yeah. I sometimes reflect. I love talking about God, but how often am I talking to God? It's like Angela. You could
Mhm,
talk about him all day, but that's not going to save you. You have to talk to him. I have to remind myself because I love
mhm.
doing this. I love talking about our Lord and I love evangelizing. But yeah, it's not really that's not the point of my life. The point of my life is being in relationship with Christ. And so I'm sort of missing the boat if I'm not in a relationship with him and I just talk about him all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like to ask people this question. We often hear sometimes, at least maybe I heard this a lot in the evangelical world. It was, how's your relationship with God going right now? But here's another counter question. How's your relationship with his mother going? How's
Hmm.
your relationship with Mary? I would challenge all of my fellow traditionalists, if you can like list out to me the intricacies of the crisis in the church, but you cannot list out for me the steps of true devotion to Our Lady written by another third order Dominican, right? St. Louis de Montfort,
Hmm.
then we're in trouble, right? You need to do that. So you need to be praying, right? Something, but ultimately these verbal prayers really should ultimately try to get you into mental prayer, which is the
Hmm.
most important kind of prayer. This prayer, which is, I'll describe about it a little bit more, but essentially what it is it's going to be you praying with your mind, right? Reflecting on different truths. And you should try to discipline yourself to do these things, at certain times of day for certain structural times. Another basic thing that I could say even with this is just for so many people, learn to get up at a precise time and go to bed at a precise time. Like get up at
I'm
6, go to bed at
so
10 or
bad
something.
at that. Hmm.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people are bad at, and it's just like, well, you know, rigidly follow that. It's funny
Hmm.
because that term has become kind of bad in the church, but then when you like read all these lives of the saints, they're like, strictly follow this rule. Do not like give a knuckles wedge
Right.
other way, except unless your like superior tells you to do something else.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, and this is where it's like a mom, it's not always possible, right? Especially you have a baby, you have a newborn baby, they're up nursing all night. And that's where I think sometimes Salesian spirituality is really helpful because it is more flexible and fluid. It's not quite as rigid, but there are basic principles that you are expected to sort
Mhm.
of adhere to or at least keep in mind so that um, and so anyway, I also recommend that to be taken into consideration if you're like, man, Ignatian spirituality or whatever, like this isn't working for me right now. That's okay. The church has probably already figured out what would probably work best for you. And as a married woman with 5 small children, I have found that Salesian spirituality and introduction to the devout life to be very helpful in making me not feel like a complete failure in my prayer life.
You could do that, but if you want to be a total Chad, do Thomas spirituality. That's what you need to do.
Be a
You
total chat. Easy for you to say. You're a single guy. And just saying.
no. We all deal the cards, I guess, that we're drawn at the current
Yeah.
moment. But yes, do stuff like that. And then the other 2 points I'd say is go to mass and confession frequently as you can. And when I say, at least when it comes to confession, obviously, you know yourself hopefully better than anyone. If you struggle with scrupulosity, right? Be attentive to that. But I would argue today, most people probably just struggle with presumption, because I think when you start to really look at what true scrupulosity is, I don't know if as many people, I don't know. I've been kind of weaned off of convinced. Like, I don't know if I really believe that most trads are scrupulous. Let's just put it that way. Just
Hmm.
because the more I'm reading about like what scrupulosity is, at least in the manuals, the moral manuals, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think people struggle with presumption more.
You think
In my
so?
Yeah, I think most people, because it's like when you study like the thing is that the scholastics are distinctive. They'll say that there's a healthy scrupulosity, especially in the early portions of conversion, because you're purging by God's grace yourself from all of these sins.
Hmm.
But an unhealthy type of scruples would be like, oh, I didn't walk in the crosswalk, I must be going to hell or something. Like, I'd be like, okay,
Mm.
calm down. Yeah, Jesus loves you. Remember that. you know. But I don't think most people struggle with that. I
Hmm.
think a lot of people struggle with presumption because they don't realize how easy um, it is to fall into mortal sin. Number one, that it's
Mhm.
exceedingly easy. But then number two, that occasions of sin are just as dangerous and should be confessed at the same time. Which leads actually perfectly into my third point, because ultimately, I think that Catholics need to do way better on their intellectual life. I think when you look at especially all the traditionalist groups, you have all your priestly groups, you have all your contemplative groups, but aside from the Fraternity of St. Vincent Ferrer, right, which is a traditional Dominican order in France, you don't have any intellectual groups at all. There's no intellectual life.
Hmm.
And Catholics today, like, we often say, oh, we just need better catechesis. And there's definitely truth to that. But like, if you look at statistically, there are way more catechism options today than there was even in the 1960s. I mean, we have the internet. We have literally catechism galore everywhere. It's people are lazy. That's the problem. People are lazy. They don't want to study their faith. They think that,
Mhm.
sitting down and reading the catechism for an hour is a drag. At the end of the day, just stop watching Netflix, stop watching garbage, go fill yourself with like a good traditional catechism. This is the purgative way.
Mhm.
But also, and that's where most of us are. And most Catholics, that's all that they get. Like some 90+% of Catholics, they only get to that. The latter two stages, the illuminative and the unified way, priests are supposed to at least get to the illuminative path before their ordination. And according to, at least if you were following the strict Thomist mentality, which Garrigou follows, all bishops are supposed to be in the unitive way, which I definitely know that's not the policy going on right now.
No.
The unitive
No.
way for viewers is like you're on earth, but in the beatific vision, practically speaking. And I'm like, I don't know if that's going on. So, but working on a good interior life is going to be the most important thing, because I say this because when you're, allowing grace to heal your nature, both in your intellect and in your will and in your passions, then what you'll be able to do is God's going to give you the grace to go out and to, take what you've learned and what you contemplated, and in a very Dominican way, bring to others the fruits of one's contemplation. So go out and to witness to people. And so, practically speaking, this is what I think people need to do. I think men need to be I think men and women have strengths in different areas of what they can do. So I think we're all called to do both, but I think that there's different strengths. So it's like, on the one hand, I think men, you need to be proactive in organizing at your local parish. And if you say, well, the priest doesn't want us to protest that which is evil, I would maybe try to talk to the priest. But I would also argue that if, like, the priest is starting to kind of hint that he supports these things, probably time for a new parish, right? So ultimately, organize at your parish on a parish level. Talk to other men that are in the parish about going and protesting these events. These events are not hard to find, because it's as simple as going to your search engine, typing in the name of your city, and then the title Pride after it, and you'll find it. You'll just find it pop up immediately, and you'll see dates, schedules, times, what type of events are going on. And especially right now, because they're really trying to push transgenderism, drag is becoming exceedingly common. Like, in a couple days, there's going to be a group of us, hopefully around 50, who are going to spend 3 days protesting, basically a 3-day long drag queen event that's going to be going on in one of these Texas towns. And so, and these are actually being sponsored by Protestant denominations. This is one of the things that I told our illustrious commander in chief, Mr. Flanders, once. I said, as a traditionalist who, at least tries to more intellectually critique the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, as opposed to like a cringe trad critique, but more intellectually critique it. I said, on a practical level, the document on ecumenism now is pretty much useless because all of those denominations that we were quote unquote trying to have, ecumenical dialogue with the 60s have all changed their views on sexual morality by this time. You look at the Methodists, the mainline Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Anglicans, they're all embracing all of this. And so
Yeah,
I'm
the
like,
ECLA. Yeah, all of them.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, okay, we either have one or two things we can do. Either A, we can join them, which is, I think, what you see a lot of synodal leaders doing. I don't know if you saw that video that came out the other day, but there was a gentleman who walked up very charitably to Cardinal Holrich, who's leading the synod, and he asked him, he was like, Your Eminence, I'm going to ask you a very straightforward, pointed question. Is homosexuality still going to be considered a sin after the synod? And the bishop would not give him an answer. And when the parishioner said, well, our catechism teaches us that this is a sin which cries against heaven, the bishop just starts saying, well, also in the Old Testament, it said we should stone women for adultery. We don't do that anymore. And, stuff changes. I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm talking to a freshman on a college campus all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, this is not the once and for all divinely revealed Catholic religion being passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, bishop to parishioner, and so organize at your local level, find good men. And then I think one thing that young women can do, I think young women should be arm in arm right out there with the men and protesting this. I don't think it's just a man's fight on the street, if you will.
No, mothers are the ones, they have like Transhausen by proxy. I mean, it is, this is women led. So much of this trans BS is, sorry, I don't know if you can hear Veronica's toy, but
you're fine.
Yeah, she was dropped off. That's why I had to jump off the screen for a minute. But anyway, this is so much of this chaos has been female led, and I think like Eve was the beginning of the fall, and Mary in her perfection redeemed Eve. She was the new Eve. She was the perfect archetype. And I think women are going to have to redeem the errors of feminism. I don't think that it's going to be male led.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you because like at the end of the day, it always takes two to tango. And so both men and women need to be proactive. I think one way women can be very proactive. I like it. It's very aesthetic.
Sorry.
As I'm ranting.
Maybe I'll mute myself.
Wait, no, that's what we should do. Just like caption this moment. Someone caption this moment and be like, a Dominican preaches with nursery aesthetics. Something like that. That's fine with me. I think what women can do is, aside from just being out there with the men, I think women especially teaching children and being like, look, here's some basic realities that are being challenged by your peers in society. Here's how they're wrong. And if you're taking my advice on studying your faith, you'll be able to clearly debunk these things, because you'll be able to say, well, when people say, what is a woman is he or she or it or they that says that they're a woman, you'll be able to turn around and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my kids. I'll be like, okay, little Jimmy, you're 5 years old. We're going to talk about ontology now. I know you can barely say Papa yet, but we're going to talk about ontology. Ontology is study of being. And so what is a woman? It has to be something, has to have some yardstick by which we determine what a woman is. It can't just be some pithy, like, I'll be like, we're Cavazoses. We're not nominalists. We don't just make up nonsensical philosophy ideas. And so you have to have some type of realism, if you will, applied to your worldview. And so therefore, I think that both men and women have like a great opportunity. But also when you see men and women on the other side of especially parents on the other side of the aisle being like, I'm going to take my 5-year-old. I'm going to be proactive in taking my 5-year-old to one of these types of events. I'm just like, if you don't believe that there's a devil out there, I just don't know. Like, is your light bulb screwed in? I don't know. But, it's crazy.
This would be a good bad feminist joke or something. Like, how many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb or something? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm sure somebody's thought of a joke. Maybe Mac knows. But, I have to agree with you. And it's funny because I recently went on my first ever silent retreat a few weeks ago, and it was such a grace. I can't totally explain what it was like. I don't know if it's because I'm a mom and it's always so chaotic at home and loud and whatever, but I also think everyone needs to go on these types of retreats, especially a silent retreat, where you are just silent with God for
Mhm.
at least 24 hours, hopefully longer than that. But it was just so profound for me. I had so many amazing moments in prayer and some comical moments. At one point, I was so overjoyed. I almost started singing. And then I realized like I couldn't. So I had to like chill out a little bit. But we have to cultivate time to talk to God, and we like there is power in silence, as Cardinal Sarah would assert. We have to cultivate more silence in our life if we want to engage in the war. And that again goes back to not sitting on these stupid time sucks all the time and constantly debating with people online. It's not worth it. If it's destroying your peace, and I'm guilty of this, not that I always do a ton of debating online. It's actually pretty rare for me. Um, but but just constantly having my mind distracted, and
Mm.
then you can't hear God. We have to cultivate silence. We have to go out of our way to do that. So I also think that's a really important part of growing in the spiritual life is creating time for silence. So for years, and especially during Lent, I always try to keep Fridays silent. I don't listen to music. I don't listen to podcasts or anything. I try to keep that day silent so I can focus more on my prayer life.
Mhm.
And Mac, yes, adoration. We need more adoration.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I think, wouldn't it be so nice if all of the Catholic YouTube channels would stop ankle biting at each other and would actually unite and say, we have some serious differences, obviously, but like our culture is falling apart. Let us at
Mm-hmm.
least unite on these things which are truly Catholic issues that we can unite on. Like, because I mean, to me, sometimes, I have all these interesting series coming up on how to like arm the Catholic in the intellectual life. Don't have your throat taken out.
She hits me a lot.
See, for the viewers, you're seeing a very different lifestyle. You see how I have all these books and I get to read and get to throw fancy words like ontology out at the camera. And then poor Angela, she's actually becoming a saint because she's taking care of children. And
I
I'm
throw
just
out
like,
words like ontology and teleology as well.
yeah, I just like telling that to like 5-year-olds and be like, you don't understand this? It's your public school education. Just
Yeah,
walk away. No,
obviously. Obviously.
something like that. But I would love it if Catholic shows would do that because instead of ankle biting at each other, like or just becoming essentially like response channels to each other. Like let's
Yeah.
just put that away and actually like do something productive on the ground because you know, these shows can become the biggest ego boosts of all time. They can just be like, "Oh wow, I'm so important. I have this camera in front of me and people are listening to me and I'm just doing all of these great things. I'm so influential." But then go outside and actually talk to the person on the street, and you'll realize, first off, most people don't know you.
Yep.
But then number
Yeah.
two, they're just living their normal lives, trying to figure out how do I feed my family, how do I just live a kind of a somewhat sane lifestyle, etc. Or there's so many people who are literally just dying for truth. Get off the computer and why don't you just like walk down the street and start talking to people? Walk into your local cafe and see who God brings you. She's adorable. She's adorable.
She is so cute. She's a lot of fun. Um, and I think too, yeah. So engaging the spiritual battle, we've talked about, the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. Um, do you have any other thoughts getting out, getting engaged? I just want to make sure we cover everything in our as practical as possible and encouraging people. Um, and for some of us, like this is where our holiness lies. Um,
Um,
you know, and there's a time and a place too. I think a lot of it is discernment. We have to discern what God is asking us to do and not take on anything more than he's asking of us, but also to not do anything less than he's asking of us, like perfect humility and obedience.
mhm. Yeah, no, I fully agree. I always give this challenge to people. I say, here's a good challenge for you. At the end of the week, most phones will let you know what
So
changed?
sorry.
I don't know.
I
I can't speak to that controversy.
sorry, Gregory.
What's it called? I think that one way that we can know maybe where we can allot our time is that for a lot of us, our phones will generally tell us this is how much time you spent this week on your phone. You know, so what I want people to do is like look at that and say, okay, unless you're working on your phone, like legitimately, I'm taking notes all day long, I'm an accountant or something like that on my computer all the time. Unless it's something like that, actually ask yourself, how am I spending my time? St. Alphonsus Liguori has a great sermon on the use of time. And oh my goodness, just like anything that he says, it convicts you to death. I think he like starts off with something like St. Alphonsus, he doesn't start off with like, it's such a beautiful morning out. Today we're going to be talking about X. It's usually like, this nun came back from the dead and would have said she would have given anything to have said one more Hail Mary to get another, like that much more merit, if you will, so that she could be closer to God. How are you spending your time? And you're just sitting there thinking, I am a terrible Catholic. But
Yeah.
in a way, that can be like, a certain amount of holy jealousy can be good, where you can be like, you know what? You're right. I'm not doing very much with my life. And so I think practically speaking, look at your life. What are you doing? Do you have time to do these things? Even if you don't have time to do these things, be at least proactive in praying about these things. Because I mean, goodness gracious, a lot of you guys, at least who are involved with the meaning of Catholic, will know this. So I had a friend recently. I put this up in our chat the other day, who was considering leaving Eastern Orthodox or joining Eastern Orthodoxy, leaving the church, and I put it out in the meaning of Catholic chat. Everyone pray for him. It was like 10 people immediately were like, yes, we'll pray for him, etc. Literally an hour later, and this guy was like really about to go off the edge. Literally an hour later, he comes to me and he's just like, I am so sorry. I can't leave the faith, etc. And I
Wow.
helped him, back in touch. But it was amazing because it was like an answer to prayer, boom, immediately. Like God is someone who will answer rightly ordered and rightly disposed prayer. And so pray about these things. Consider how much time you have to give to these things. Work on your own spiritual life, but don't be black pilled. The last thing I'll say is this: is like, don't be black pilled because the communists want you to be black pilled, the leftists want you to be black pilled, and Satan wants you to be black pilled. They don't want you to vote. Like a lot of people, I don't know, I do not understand this. I understand where a lot of people say, yeah, I've kind of just given up on the election system, yada yada yada. I'm like, you know what? Stop saying that. That's not helping at all. It's not helping at all. Just complaining. Get out and go vote. Get out and actually like try to get actual good candidates. I don't understand this kind of woe is me mentality of everything is going to hell in a handbasket. I guess I'm just going to go live on a Amish community and wait out until the end times are over. I'm like, you know what? That is the most cowardly thing ever. All of your ancestors got you guys to this point. They were out there in the middle of the caves or the plains, surviving, if you will, on next to nothing or having to hunt or bringing you to the faith. All these uneducated peasants building these cathedrals, being attacked by Saracen, hordes here, there, and everywhere, right? Popes going out in the snow and negotiating for the Mongol hordes to leave. And what are we doing? Oh, the FBI. I guess I'll just hide in my house and not do anything. I don't understand. Like, we need to go back and say, let's have some serious fortitude, right? Let's have some serious fortitude and not fall into the sin of man pleasing, right? Just like the Pharisees did, right? They just wanted to be seen by men and praised by men. And a lot of Catholics, whether they wish to admit to it or not, they want the world's approval too. They're like, oh, I don't agree with the leftists, but man, I just don't want to be attacked by them. So I won't do anything. I won't say anything. I'll just be quiet about it. Well, look where being quiet about it's gotten us. Gotten us nowhere.
Yeah, I think one of the final things that I would like to add is I think a couple of good resources too would be Deliverance Prayers for the Laity by Father Chad Ripperger.
Mhm.
But also make sure you listen to him talk about how to use that book and read about it, because it's not something you're just supposed to flippantly use. You want to be in a state of grace. You want to be availing yourself of the sacraments, because these prayers are very powerful. And sort of with that, so much of those prayers attack, I guess, so to speak, generational sin, things that are inflicting your family or your lineage, your heritage. And so I think also taking time to address any wounds that you may have. Because the enemy likes to use the wounds that you have, especially the ones that you're not totally aware of, to wreak havoc in your life. And often you find yourself wondering, why am I struggling so much with this? And it's because of something that's there, some sort of wound. It can be a mother wound, it can be a father wound, it can be I think just experiences that we have as children, and having to remind ourselves and talk to the Lord about that, and realize that God has been with us always. Especially if we're baptized and we're temples of the Holy Spirit. He has been with us, and he's been with us even in our suffering, and we need to allow him to heal those parts of us that we don't want to show anyone, lest we be more vulnerable. But that's
Mhm.
exactly what he wants. He wants us to be vulnerable with him. And the enemy knows that. Then the enemy knows that he will heal that. He is the divine physician. And he desires that for us, right? Like, I think sometimes we feel like we're not worthy enough to be healed. And so we don't ask for it. Or we think
Mhm.
that we believe the lies that the enemy has told us. That was something I realized so much in my silent retreat was, wow, there were so many lies I believed about myself, and having to actually physically rebuke them and say, in the name of Jesus Christ, I rebuke the lie, or I renounce the lie that I am unlovable, and affirm the truth that Jesus died on the cross for me out of love for me, because he wants to spend all of eternity with me. Like,
Mhm.
having to actually do that to remind yourself and renounce the lies. I think that's something also that we have to do in spiritual battle. When we sense that the enemy is attacking us, renounce it, rebuke him, and tell him to go away. Be gone, Satan, get behind me.
Mhm.
And not be afraid to do that. It's not crazy or weird for you to do that. This is war. This is war. You need to pull out all the stops.
Yeah, no, fully agree. I think that's so good because we don't often think about the things that maybe our parents or grandparents or ancestors did. Like I'm coming out with a video in a couple weeks because I still have to film it. But I'm going to be doing a video at the local cathedral where I'll be renouncing my grandfather's Masonic ties. He ended up being a 32nd degree Freemason. So
Wow.
yeah, like right up there. And so Father Ripperger has these wonderful prayers, right, where you renounce all of these
Yeah.
ties, and you actually what you do, like even you just talking about, like you physically saying it. There's even prayers like where you're like physically, if, or symbolically rather, removing the Masonic blindfold from yourself. Like you don't even
Yeah.
know how these things are attached to you. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a component of the spiritual battle that is often overlooked. We can see some of the obvious things, like what's going on in the world around us, but what about the war waging within our own souls?
Hmm.
How are we
Yeah.
addressing that?
Yeah, because that's at the end of the day, like it's going to be in your will where it's going to be sane or not. You know, that's
Absolutely.
where it's.
Well, do you think we should wrap it up for the evening? If anyone has any questions, maybe now would be the time to ask. And make sure you keep Nicholas and everyone that he's going to be protesting this drags chaos with. Keep them in your prayers, and you'll be updating us on your social media, right? And on your
Yeah,
channel.
so I'll be updating tomorrow on the social media. So go. The only social media that I have for like frequent updates is Instagram, the traditional Thomist on Instagram. So go down there. It'd also be cool. I never really asked this, but it'd be cool if we get 1,000 followers. We're getting kind of like in the general
You're so
ballpark, like
cool.
400 people away. So
I'm almost 450. So if you're
you
not
need
subscribed to my channel, you should go over to my channel as well and subscribe. I would love that.
No, please do. Her channel is pretty cool. Because it's actually somewhat chill. I feel like mine is like stuck in a stuffy library or something half the time. But no, yeah, so we'll be updating to people tomorrow on some. I'll be taking some of the footage tomorrow, but I'll also be taking some good cinematic footage tomorrow because I'm planning on making a video of us protesting this, and we'll see what happens. So hopefully the Satanists don't just go fisticuffs mode because yeah, they can be a violent bunch, but we'll see what happens. And so you might see the first episode of Traditional Thomas SmackDown Raw or something.
Oh my goodness,
episode 1.
please use a super clickbaity title too. I would love that. Nicholas Cavazos destroys the Satanists. Watch Nick Cavazos give a beat down.
I'll just give like the corny John Cena intro to the video.
Stop.
And just like, yeah.
I'm like,
I'll just see St. Thomas flying out of nowhere, just smashing the head of Satan.
that would be super funny. Oh, well, thanks again. Do you have anything else coming up on your channel? I know you've been plugging a few things a few projects that you have coming up here. So maybe I'll give you another chance to do that before we
Yeah, the only thing
sign
is
off.
I have 3 videos coming out this week, actually. So one of them is going to be just kind of a general update saying hello, because again, kind of been away from the audience for a bit. So just kind of giving a hello and howdy, as we say. And then the second one is going to be my first Q&A video. So actually, if I'm going to be doing one more probably tomorrow or Wednesday submission on Instagram, right? Questions for me that you just want me to ask or answer. So these could be anywhere in the world of Thomism if you just have some like very niche scholastic questions, or they can be about the Latin Mass and the SSPX. They can be about what we're talking about here. They could also just be like, how tall are you? Or something like that. Tell me about your life. So I'll be doing that. And then more series wise, my most popular series on my show is called The Problems with the Novus Ordo Mass, where I am doing like a systematic, structured critique of the liturgy itself when it comes to comparing specifically the 2 missals in and of themselves. And so we've done 4, if my memory is correct, 4 episodes up to this point. We did a general introduction as well as discussions along the nature of how does tradition develop as opposed to evolving, and how does that practically manifest itself in the Mass. Our last episode that we talked about was we also talked about disputed questions like liturgical infallibility, because that is a more niche question, which I'll be actually making another episode on in the future. And our last video, we kind of got a little spicy. It was called the anti-liturgical heresy. We went over specifically what Dom Guéranger was saying about the. Oh yeah, I've not met His Eminence Bishop Strickland, but I have had friends who have met him who say that he's exceedingly holy. He spends, I think, the first hour of his day in adoration. So he's a very holy man. Yeah, this last episode we did was I was going through Dom Guéranger's writings about how the movement, even at his time of the liturgical movement, was already being co-opted by very, very questionable theological sources. People, even some like, for instance, communistic Benedictines and antiquarians throwing in a lot of things along the nature of, the liturgy in the beginning of the church used to be, everyone was facing the people. Everything was kind of just like very, loosey-goosey and free fall, and all of these medieval superstitions, just kind of built up over time, and we just need to strip everything away. So we'll actually be, I think, getting into tomorrow, specifically the book that we're going into is going to be The Problem with the Liturgical Form, which is a great basic, but also I'd say fairly scholarly text that examines the new liturgy, because what I want to do is I want to specifically show the Concilium team members, the men who like sat down and worked on the new liturgy. Not all, but a lot of them had some fundamentally anti-Catholic views when it came to specifically 3 issues: the propitiatory nature of the sacrifice of the Mass, so that the Mass appeases God's wrath because of sin. 2, they wanted to downplay the actions of the priest and make the laity kind of build up a kind of, spiritual priesthood along with the, sacerdotal priesthood, which you see clearly manifested in actions like lay Eucharistic ministers, something Aquinas would have thought was absolutely insane. You would have seen things along that nature. And then finally, the de-emphasis in Christ being present in the Eucharist. So you see, of course, the new liturgy affirms that Christ is present in the Eucharist, although the original New Mass Missal didn't even have the word transubstantiation in it. Like, that goes to show you how bad it was. It didn't even have that word in the whole Missal.
Wow.
Transubstantiation. But you do see an overemphasis now in Christ is in the people, Christ is in the altar, Christ is in the word. And then you see Christ himself practically, at least in most settings, treated very irreverently. Whether it be saying that I will die on this hill on the debate on communion in the hand, or again, lay Eucharistic ministers, or just in general, the kind of nonchalant attitude we have when it comes to so many people being in mortal sin, preaching about sin anymore, and systematically everyone's going to communion in a state of mortal sin. And so that video, and so that'd be the most controversial of the week, but yeah, it should be fun.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on here. For those of you who missed the stream this morning, I had the honor and pleasure of interviewing the one and only paleocrat, Jeremiah Bannister, on his new book. It's out. You can buy his book, She Danced Me a Story, on Amazon. I highly recommend getting a hard copy, but you can get it on Kindle, I believe, although they're not recommending that. You can also email him or at what is it, paleocrat@gmail or something, paleocratdiaries@gmail.com, I think. But
like you can do at the meaning of Catholic.
Yeah, so yep, email them, and you can order a PDF version, which is what I read. But his book is amazing. I'm not just saying that. It was very, very powerful, and I found myself weeping last night reading it. So really good stuff. And yeah, I have some stuff coming out on my channel soon. So if you're not subscribed over at Integrated with Angela Erickson, I would love to see you over there. It would be an honor. I don't put out a ton of content because, I'm a mom with 5 kids, but I do have some really good stuff. Today, I just interviewed Dr. Mary Eberstadt on her book, Adam and Eve After the Pill Revisited. And I have a friend, Mark from Tradmen. Maybe some of you might be familiar with him, but we talked about his struggle with infertility. He and his wife have not been able to have children. And I just feel like we never get the male perspective on that. So wanted to offer that as well. And I just sort of cover all kinds of random stuff on my channel. So anyway, it'd be fun to see you guys over there. I would appreciate it. And thanks for joining us today, you guys. And I'm glad that we finally got this going. So thanks for joining. See you later. God bless.